Hey, what's going on? My name's Robert, and you are watching Southpaw AutoWorks. This is the 4R70W. In this video, you are going to get an inside look at what it takes to disassemble this Ford automatic transmission. Andy is going to be sharing some textbook disassembly techniques, and he'll also be including some pro tips and tricks along the way. Without further ado, let's get the show on the road.
All right, today on this one, we're going to work on a 4R70W. We did a video for you already on the AODE. What they did over the years is made some changes, and it went from AODE to AODE, which was simply electronic controls. And then they changed the name on it to a 4R70W, and then there's even a 4R75W. I want to cover some of the differences. A lot of the internal components are probably going to be pretty much the same, you'll see, compared to the AOD, but I do want to show you differences between that and the 4R70W. One of them being right on the outside of the case. We've got a hole here for a speed sensor, which was known as an intermediate speed sensor. Sensor's gone. And the output speed sensor. When they went to the AODE, they did have the output sensor, but they didn't have the intermediate speed sensor. That came in later years. Okay, I can't tell you exact years on that because it did change around a little bit. But now this is a out of a four-wheel drive vehicle. I believe it was an Expedition. So the output shaft's going to be a little bit shorter. And of course, we don't have the aluminum extension housing, and I don't have the adapter housing that would normally go on here for the four-wheel drive unit. So what we're going to do first is just take the output speed sensor off, get that out of the way. And then we'll remove the pan and valve body. Pull this baby over. All right, got the pan off here. We've got some clutch material. Looks like maybe some metal, aluminum, who knows? Some other kind of foreign object. I'm not sure what the hell that is. Magnet down here, pretty fuzzy. A lot of metal on there. If we run our finger across there, kind of shove it down to where you see the original thickness, if you will, of the magnet. A lot of accumulation on there. It's what we call a Don King magnet. Kind of look like his hair, if you ever saw his hair. Okay, filter on this, no clips or anything. It's just simply held in by the grommet, if you will. Got to hang on to that. Hopefully not make a mess. There. This is, just for a side note, this is a earlier filter. It's flatter, does not have the extended pickup on it. They did in some of the four-wheel drives and later applications. Okay, it looks like somebody may have serviced this or done some work on it. And according to the pan that we have, which has the nice bump or sump on the bottom, this is actually the incorrect filter for this application. This should have the deeper filter on it with the pickup tube that would stick down into that little extended area on the pan itself. So would still function, just doesn't happen to be the correct filter that's in there. So the valve body and electronics here, we've got shift solenoids, lockup solenoid. Not easy to see in here. We'll show you that a little later. The EPC, electronic pressure control solenoid. Okay. We've got to get this little harness off here. It's what they call a hard wire or molded lead frame. The earlier models had a actual wire harness with loose wires. Then they changed their mind, went to the lead frame, and then in, I forget the exact year, 09 or something, they changed again, got rid of the molded lead frame, went back to a regular wire type harness again. So to release this harness, you've got several clips, okay? There's one here where it connects to the case connector itself, pocket screwdriver or a pick there. And then what I do is a screwdriver underneath here, pry up lightly. Okay. Next clip is going to be down through this little access hole, if you will. Right here, we've got to pry forward on that a little bit, very similar to the one in the back of the case. And then another screwdriver or something to get underneath there. Pry up carefully on that. Next one we've got to get is over here. And it looks like it's already coming loose. We pry there and there. And finally, on the pressure control solenoid, it may or may not have a clip on it depending on the year or model of the harness itself, because they did make some changes. But we're once again going to pry out on the lock and then pry up on the harness to release it. That allows that to be released from all of those solenoids. So next we remove a whole bunch of valve body bolts here. Just a little note, what you want to take out is all of the smaller bolts here, which are the 8mm. Not necessary to remove the 10mm bolts to get the valve body off. That would be to complete the disassembly of the valve body itself. So just the smaller bolts that we need to remove at this time. All right, we're going to take off the bolt holding down the detent rooster comb there for the manual valve and linkage. And then one here for the bracket for the pressure control solenoid. And two bolts here that are holding down this gold bracket. That is an aftermarket item. That's a part of a Transgo shift kit. We'll probably go over that at a later time. That's got a little spring and a plunger on it. We'll explain the use of that later, but that would not be on a factory unit. That's kind of an add-on type deal. And then just the rest of the valve body bolts. All right, if we got them all, it should be good just to lift the valve body off. And we've got one of the gaskets stuck to the case here. Peel that out of the way. Okay, we'll just set the valve body aside. Now, one of the simpler things to get out would be our accumulator at the back of the case here. It simply kind of presses down into the bore. There's nothing really holding it. It's actually the valve body. When the valve body bolts in place is what actually sets against this little tip right here, holds it in place. Just give that a little pop. And that simply comes out of the case. And then the return spring or accumulator spring there. Then we've got another accumulator up here we'll go after here in a minute. Main thing we've got to have is these two removed. These are both servos for the bands. Makes it easier for us to get all the components out of the case. Now they do make a tool for compressing. This guy's got a pretty heavy duty spring behind him. Okay, we don't have the tool here, so we're probably just going to have to pick it out of there. But the tool would bolt to a couple of the bolt holes here, bridge across here, push down and hold that in place for us, making it easier for us to get the snap ring out. This is a little different snap ring than the AOD that we did just pick out with a snap ring or with a pick itself. This is actually has the eyelets here that we would use a pair of snap ring pliers similar to this, probably a little larger if we've got a larger pair, but squeeze that snap ring in and get that servo out. We may have to fight that a little bit. I'm going to go after the case connector here real quick and get that out of our way so we don't roll it over on the bench and break it. All we've got to do on this style connector is just simply tap up on that. It's just an O-ring. seals it to the case. That comes out. Somebody's got a little silicone on there, I think, so it sticks in the case a little bit. But the earlier ones I mentioned that just have a regular wire harness, loose wires, the harness and the wiring and everything here is all the same thing. So you would actually take this out as one unit. But this is the guy that connects here. Get those out of the way. Now, as I mentioned, we don't have the exact tool to get this compressed, but we've come up and rummaged through Robert's stuff. We came up with a good old bar clamp or whatever they call that. It looks like we might be able to make this work. Going clear on top of the case. Come down here. And we're going to try and relieve some of that spring tension because it's a pretty heavy spring on that servo. Now, it might be in our way a little bit, it looks like, where we've got to move the snap ring, but we're going to give it a go and see if we can get this. We can probably get 1/2 of it maybe released, maybe get a face full of fluid, is what I figured. Give Robert a hard time for not having bigger snap ring pliers, but if we can get one side released, there we go, we got her started. Now we should be able to walk it around at least enough. So we've got 1/2 the snap ring out of the groove. We started to walk it around, but our little bar clamp piece is going to be in the way a little bit here. So what I'm thinking we can probably do is rotate this guy around. Oop, starting to go back in the groove. That's all right. Yep, we went clear back in there. Okay, what we can do is try and straddle that with the snap ring if we can get it far enough to round there. So let me try this again. There it is. Now that, I think, is far enough out of the groove where we can release. And if she don't go, I'm going to keep a finger over this because I'm worried that we're going to still have a little bit of spring tension. Now we're going to have to pop our clamp loose. There we go. Okay. There we go. Got our snap ring out. Just another note on this. Common problem on this trans is for this snap ring to break at the very end right here. Snaps off, that piece of the snap ring falls into the valve body. If my memory serves me correctly, it falls right into one of the shift valves and creates I think it's a no 2-3 or no 3-4 shift. But common problem. It's so common now that this snap ring is actually included in the more popular gasket kits or overhaul kits because it commonly breaks. So this always gets tossed. Put a new one in no matter what. Another one that breaks too is this little E-clip, C-clip right here. My recommendation is you're going to replace that servo piston anyway. So, of course, you don't have to worry about that guy. So we're going to lift that up. And here's kind of the boxcar spring we were dealing with there. A little heavier than the AODE Overdrive return spring. They beefed that up a bit on this unit. So they did make a change on this Overdrive servo. As you can see, it's pretty much just one piece pin and the piston and cover and everything. On the earlier models, sometimes referred to as the AODE, not the 4R70, they had a two-piece and it had a cover, a sleeve that went over this itself. Okay. In the later models, they changed it to this style. Do not change them one for the other. It does make a difference in the way that the unit shifts. If you take out the two-piece, put in the two-piece. Take out this one, put in this one. Next is our low reverse servo. That guy we simply have to pick out of there like we did on the AOD. Try and get our pick, pocket screwdriver, whatever it takes. And try and not get a face full of fluid like we did on the Overdrive. Try and get behind that snap ring. If we can there. And at the same time, Get our pocket screwdriver in there and not get stabbed. There we go. Get her started. Spring tension behind this, not as much as the Overdrive, and they'll stick in there so they'll fool you. So hang on to it. A couple of love taps. Usually we'll release that. That's your servo cover, what's known as a molded seal on that guy. And then what I do to get this one out, the piston, to lay her down, just give her a little stab or two there. And there's your return spring, also a molded style servo piston. We would just replace both that and the cover during the normal overhaul. So get this guy out, we just give her a little push or two there. Lift up on that, there's our spring and our piston. Okay, accumulator in the back of the case, pair of snap ring pliers works good. Reach in there, expand those, grab it, pull her right out. This piston also changed from back in the day from the AODE to AODE 4R70W. Once again, they did a molded servo piston here. The earlier ones had aluminum pistons with an O-ring seal. Always been a big wear item, big problem with this, so they changed it to this. Was supposed to be an improvement. But notice right here, Robert, get a shot of that. There's the problem with some of the molded pistons there. They delaminate and simply peel apart. That would have created a major leak in our clutch circuit, probably causing those clutches to burn or to seriously be damaged. Okay, we're gonna get the pump out next. Like we showed you on the AOD, several different ways you can get your pump out using one of the pump pullers, using a pry bar with a couple of bolts. We're gonna use the slide hammer on this one. So before we pull our pump, of course, we wanna check the end play, and that would be just for the ball buster out there, and you know who you are, all right? So, check an end play, just a pair of pliers or something here. I'm gonna try and move this input shaft in and out. We do have very little amount. We can try measuring it with the calipers. I don't think it's enough to really register, but we'll go ahead and give it a try. Take a pair of dial calipers, just measure from that stationary shaft to the end of the input shaft. We have roughly 2-inch, 258 thousandths, okay? Now, pull out, which is very little. Stick our calipers back on there. See what kind of measurement we get. Very minimal, maybe 5 thousandths, give or take, which is perfect in our book. If we rebuilt this, didn't have to replace any major components, we wouldn't have to change the end play washer. But once again, doesn't hurt to check it first. Now, in the AOD video, we showed you a couple different ways to get the pump out. Last time we used this little heel bar with a couple of bolts, threaded in here and here. We pried it out. This time, a little different method. This is the way I used to use for years when I worked at Ford and Lincoln Mercury. You have an adapter on your regular body type slide hammer here. And we thread that baby in. All right. And pull the dent. There it is. Doesn't always come out that easy. Sometimes you got to switch to the other side of the pump. Okay, get that out of there. Front pump. Now on the back of this is going to look different if you remember, or if you've seen the one from the AOD video. Okay, they changed this a little bit. This is now your return spring setup for this intermediate piston that is on the back of the pump itself. The AOD has a set of springs with a little retainer that snaps over that piston and locks itself to the pump body itself, being a return spring. What this guy does is he sets down in the case this direction, rests against the piston, and acts as a return spring, and that would be the wavy heavy-duty spring right there. So anyway, over the years they did change this, be aware. Ford engineers didn't like the first style for whatever reason, changed that up a little bit. The intermediate piston on this also changed from the style in AOD. We're just going to grab this with a pair of pliers and yank it out of there. This is a molded style piston instead of the aluminum with the replaceable seals like it was in the AOD. So this would get replaced during overhaul. Get the pump gasket on there, no big deal. Here's our washer once again, known as a selective washer. That's the guy we would change the thickness of to control the end play, but the end play on this being so minimal, if we don't do any major changes inside, no need to change the washer. So, split the pump for you. It's your pump stator or pump cover. Once again, just taking a quick look here where these gears would be right in against here. Make sure there's no major wear and tear in that area. Ford pumps, usually not a problem like this. Usually not an area that has issues. And there's your pump gears, inner and outer. Be aware, of course, this is a directional gear. Does make a difference which way you install this. And on the Ford, just like so many others, there is a little chamfer on that edge of the pump gear. That chamfer or tapered edge right there is always going to face down into the pump body, which when installed in the trans would face towards the torque converter. If you flip that over, just like in a GM and so many others, chances are when the converter's installed, bolted to the engine, you're going to drive that pump gear into this surface, damaging it and the pump and probably the converter hub. Very common problem. So be aware of that, please, when you reassemble or build this transmission. Next to get out, intermediate clutches, input shaft, forward drum, reverse drum. If we're lucky and the band is not hooked to the case too well at this point, we can get a hold of that. We just grab everything in one shot, pull it out. Intermediate clutch is very similar to the AOD. Difference here being rubber gets a shot of that. Notice what it says there, intermediate 4-plate. What's different about that? AOD had 3 clutches, 4R70 added another clutch. And yes, as a little tip for you, at no additional charge, you can take this pressure plate and put that in your AOD, add 1 more clutch, make it a little heavier. All right, intermediate clutches. Overdrive band. Reverse input drum with the intermediate 1-way clutch. All right. Little different style 1-way clutch here than we showed you in the AOD. Notice the ratcheting sound to it. It's a mechanical diode type 1-way clutch instead of a spring and roller or sprag type. Once again, Ford changed their mind, changed the design on that. And also a note here, we have an aftermarket snap ring in place of the factory snap ring. This is a spiral type snap ring with an additional retainer on the outside where they've peened over or knocked over the edges of that. And the idea behind that is to help retain that snap ring in place. Common failure, centrifugal force, when this drum gets to spinning too fast, the snap ring would walk literally out of its groove, come dislodged, and then it would usually come up and tear up our snap ring. The thrust washer would ride against here and chew that up. So someone's been into this unit, upgraded it with the spiral type, which is a much better design, stays in place a lot better. Quick peek at the clutches in here. Like I said, these are reverse. there. And we'll take a look at our forward clutches. Into that snap ring. And there's our forward clutches. So far, not seeing a lot of issues with the clutches or band in this unit. What I suspect is when we get down to the bottom to the direct clutch, we'll probably see an issue. Although I do note right here, rubber can get a shot of that, we've got a wear mark on the top of this pressure plate. That should not be touching anything. So for some reason, this forward clutch pack and or the components in the rear of the case have come forward. They've come to meet, if you will, and rub against each other, and they should not have been. Whether that's from a previous failure or not, we'll just have to see once we get down into the unit. And also, the forward drum here, this housing has been replaced with an aftermarket unit. This drum itself was also a high failure rate item. And originally, if Robert can get a shot of it, if you look down inside the forward drum here, okay? It's what we call a stamped drum, a stamped steel rather than a cast or forged drum. That's what this drum would have looked like from the factory. Also a high failure rate. It would crack around the outside of the drum where the snap ring goes and cause these forward clutches to slip. So once again, someone's been in the unit, rebuilt it, and has upgraded it to a solid type forward drum. So we'll pull out a couple more pieces here. There's our forward clutch hub. And I'll show you this in a minute, and Robert will get a close-up of it, but look like we've got some pretty heavy spline wear in there. That's going to be very hard to see, but I want to try and show that to you because it is worth noting. Okay. Then we got what some people refer to as the railroad spike. Okay. What they did here is, if you remember from the AODE video, we had two input shafts or a split input. On the AODE 470, they eliminated that, went back to a standard one shaft, if you will. And now we've added this guy in between. He now splines to the forward drum. The other end splines down to the direct drum, or the third clutch is down there in the very bottom of the trans. A few more pieces. Shell, sun gear, another sun gear here, and let's see if we see any marks. I'm not seeing any mark down in here. And what I'm looking for was wherever that forward pressure plate that had a wear mark on it that I showed you, and this sitting down in here, whether that was making contact, and it does not look like it is at this point. So my best estimate on this was from a previous failure. But of course, we'll continue to look down in the unit, make sure we don't see anything else. This shell did change several times over the years from the AODE to E to 4R70W. And one of the major changes they made was the intermediate speed sensor hole that I showed you in the case. That sensor would normally go right in here. That sensor actually reads these lugs right here. That is what they call the exciter ring for that sensor. Right? That's not me, that's the bench draining. So what they had to do when they put that sensor in, because the shell rides over there, is they had to change this material here. So this is no longer a magnetic shell, okay? It's a non-magnetic shell. So the sensor can actually read through that shell and read the rotational speed of that input or forward drum. Early units, this would have been metal, and my magnet would have stuck to it. If you put a magnetic shell in this trans, not going to work. You'll get a code for that intermediate speed sensor not reading correctly or reading at all. Another item that I want to show you here, that's known as another little type of anti-rattle or anti-clunk spring. And what they did, also this is something they changed over the years, was not in the early units. They added a little spring that went down in the case between the clutches and the lugs, if you will, in the case itself. So when these steels were all lined up here with the pressure plate, kind of that effect, this little spring went down in there and was supposed to keep these clutches from rattling around in the case, making some kind of a noise. Don't think I've ever heard it make the noise, but they thought it did. They added a clip to it. It's just something you find on the later model units, not on the earlier. We've got a snap ring here. We've got to remove around the outside of that center support. Get in behind that, if we can, with a screwdriver, hook it. That's the guy we were getting out of the case. Believe it or not, also another high failure rate. The aftermarket industry makes a heavy duty version of the snap ring to go back in because they do break. Now, next thing we've got to do is locate the anti-clunk spring for that center support and try and peel that out of the case if we can. So we're trying to pick out that anti-clunk spring, which is going to be way up in here. And there's no real science to it. It's just a matter of hooking it, picking it, whatever you got to do. And that is the guy we were trying to get out. So just to show you the difference of what they changed over the years between these clunk springs, this is the one we pulled out of the AODE trans that they used for many years. And this is the updated version. As I mentioned in the video before, this guy tends to dig into the support and into the case both, causing, some abnormal wear, if you will. This guy was replaced by this guy, and yes, this can be used in place of this one in your AOD. Once again, doing a slight upgrade, if you will. That guy's supposed to cushion the center support because the Planetary gear set action in drive range, when you drop the shifter into drive, is to cause the Planetary gear set to want to rotate counterclockwise. When it does, there's a one-way clutch on it that tries to rotate the center support against the case. And that could cause a clunk sound each time you put it in drive. This is in between there to try and absorb some of that motion, if you will, slow it down so that you don't hear a clunk each time that it goes into drive. All right, we're going for our center support here. Should be able to reach in and grab that. Probably take the Planetary carrier with it. There. Quick note, this center support that our clunk spring was riding against is also different on your 4R70 with the intermediate speed sensor that I mentioned, because we've got to have a notch for that speed sensor to go through the case, through the center support, and once again read that forward drum. They all have the notch on the other side over here, and that's simply to clear one of the band anchors that's down in the case. But this being different, like I said, for the 4R70 and that intermediate speed sensor. So I mentioned before about the clunk spring and how that rides against that center support. Just a little teachable moment here. That's kind of the way it would look down in the case, if you will. We'd ride against one of the lugs on the center support. And the reason for that is our one-way clutch that's on this center support here. Okay? See, our center support would allow the Planetary to only rotate one direction. So when that Planetary goes to turn counterclockwise, one-way clutch is going to lock. This guy tries to smack itself against the case. The clunk spring being in there is going to slow that down or cushion that a little bit. Next is the big band in the back of the case there. Low reverse band. Pull kind of opposite the side that it anchors or hooks to the case. Anchor is the double side here. We simply pull that out. Once again, the band, like most of the rest so far, looks pretty good. we're going to find, I think, our problem's going to be down in here in this small set of clutches in the back of the case, which we can now separate. And there we got it. You can see how black that pressure plate is. It's even gotten to overheat the hub itself. These clutches have failed. Get our hub out of there. Crispy critters. Not much left in this drum that's good there. Pressure plate's also going to be no good. It will have overheated and warped. So this entire clutch pack will need to be replaced. And there might even be a good chance we'll want to replace the drum. There was so much contamination and centrifugal force that coats it down here on the outside of the drum, in between each one of these lugs. And then you usually get some contamination here on your bushing journals, okay, or the bushings right here. So those get scratched up. This would be one, if I were building it, we'd just throw this drum away and start over again with another drum. Very common failure rate. Just to show you, on the AOD, we had that long direct drive shaft that went clear through the trans, splined to that direct drum. This is how they obtained the same function in the AODE 4R70 is by this guy here. And as I showed you before, then that would spline directly to the forward drum. Last, as far as our components in the case, is going to be the rear ring gear, output shaft here, ring gear inside of there, and the snap ring that most people don't know where that goes. I mentioned it in the AOD video. It's simply an assembly aid, sits down against the lip in the case. And that was something because when they built the transmission standing straight up, the band would tend to fall too far down into the case, so they put a snap ring in for that to rest against. It's not an absolute, but it is an assembly aid. And the reason is if it drops too far, the servo misses the band. Instead of hooking here, it misses here, or actually technically would be above it. Thereby, not being able to operate the band, you would lose your reverse and manual low ranges. That pretty well empties the case, except for one accumulator, which we did not take out earlier. Spring tension behind this, depending if it's got 1 or 2 or 4 springs. This one probably has 4, so it's going to have quite a bit of tension. This is going to be one we want to put that bar clamp or something in here to allow us to take some tension off those springs before we release that snap ring, or we're going to wear that thing. So slide that guy down so we can take some of the spring tension off of there. Hope that bar clamp stays in place. And kind of opposite of where I would work here, but there we go. Release some of that spring tension. Now we're going to have to release the bar clamp, so. Come on, baby. There she goes. Snap ring. The cover. They give you that in the overhaul kit now. It used to be you had to buy that separately. Also a molded rubber seal. Earlier AOD, that was an aluminum piston with an O-ring around it. So we've got 2 springs top side plus a spacer. And then once again, we just use our regular snap ring pliers, grab the accumulator piston out of there. Another molded one, we'd just replace that during overhaul. And a couple more springs in there. Okay, so the last thing in our case here, basically, that we would want to remove before we were to clean this would be the electronic pressure control solenoid, also known as EPC. In order to do that, we need to take this pin out. So the tool I use to get this little roll pin out of here is simply a pair of small side cutters. All right. Hook that, and then we use the case as leverage to pry that out. pin is a locator to keep that shaft from moving side to side in the case itself. Next, we need a wrench to go on here and get this nut loose from the case. We're going to work against this, so either we've got to get on this side, kind of the back side from where I'm at, and it could be a bit of a fight because you've got the pin right here. So you don't have to do it that way. You can come back over here if you like. I don't have the exact size, so it's not going to fit on there real easy. And then what you can do is use a tool here to hold this so that you can pry against that to try and get that nut loose. Right, like that. So, break that loose. Get that off of there. That should allow us to take the shaft up out of the case. Yeah. There. Let me take the rooster comb and the park rod out of there. And what I do is just take my wrench, kind of come underneath the EPC right here. This wrench is a little fatter. Here we go. Just kind of use that as a little pry tool. We take that pressure control solenoid out, and of course the nut for the linkage itself. The park pole, spring, and rod back here is not necessary to have to be removed. I usually just leave it in the case. It's fine in there. You can wash the case, and it's usually good. Doesn't pop out on you.
This show is a ton of hours to produce, and we could really use your help. You can learn more by checking out the video description down below. So you just got done watching the Ford 4R70W teardown video. Naturally, in the near future, we're going to dedicate a video to the inspection of said unit. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell too, so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. Once again, my name's Robert, and I will see you next time.